Hello and welcome to Dell's Gaming, and this is from the Depths Designer. And in this episode we're going to be looking at primarily Steam. The current build I'm running on is, I think it's 2.3.1.9, and there's been a few updates and a few changes. Biggest one has been that's going to affect the game is Steam and Steam propellers. So we're going to have a look at that. But a couple of items. First of all, the audio of where I am at the moment is a little echoey. I'm going to next few videos work on trying to reduce it, but please bear with me while I'm in this location, and I will try to improve it over time. Okay, so in the latest build, if I'm going to bring up my UI so I can see, there is under Steam engines, first of all, you have a huge boiler and gearbox solutions, which we'll have a look at in a second, and also these new gearboxes, and at the end of each is these extra components all for the steam propellers, and they are the same in each of them with some slight differences we'll go through. So first of all, the huge boilers. So the huge boilers are basically significantly larger, as would be explained, as would be sort of expected for being huge. So even a basic one has an armor of 6 and a health of 5,000. So they're resilient, whereas normal ones 500 or 250. So they are much larger. So if we go and have a quick look, so we've got three main parts for the actual main first part. Let me just get on a slightly different block. You have the controller is the first, rather than having a separate controller and boiler like you have on normal Steam engines. The first controller is actually a boiler and controller in one, which makes sense. So that is the first block, and I wouldn't say it's all visual, but it is visually looks much nicer. The second part is there is actually just purely a boiler chamber, has nothing else. It's like a central part to the boiler. Graphically, it is in the center, just adds volume. The next is the control. I'm trying to think of the right word now. Oh no, look, connector. That's the right word. I was going to say controller, but it's connector. So, unlike the other boilers, the connector are at the side. You actually have two connectors. If I put one here as well, normally on the other boilers, they're at the rear. There's a connection point. This huge boiler has two connectors, one on each side. Could be used in multiple ways. Send out to two different engines, potentially, or you could join up multiple boilers using this particular pipe as well, I would guess. Then finally you have an end plate. So the end plate just finishes off the looks and makes it aesthetically, I suppose, appealing. It looks like just about identical to the front plate. It just doesn't have any of the control systems, so it's just a boiler. Pipework is the same. The next component is the large piston. So this is coming under, again, huge gearbox. And then you have the piston 4 meter. So this, I quite like the looks of it. It's, as you can see, it's using up a bigger space, a 2 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 squares high, and 2x2 on the top. So it's a much larger piston, and associated with it is a much larger crank. So we've got a crank here, which is 3B2x2. So we've got a large crank, so these take up quite a lot of height here. We've got about 8 spaces, I think, here of height for this piston. Does produce a lot of power, which we can see in a minute. And then there is, let me just go on a different block so I'm not covering what we're looking at. There is engine shafts. So the engine shafts allow you to join up and put wheels and the next items on there. So we've got a wheel and a generator. So we just hold it there and then I'll show these other parts in a minute. So performance wise, if we just put this up, this boiler, which is a simple 4-point boiler, we'll put it up to, for comparison's sake, we'll put it up to 10%. Oh well, we'll put it up to 1. Full, doesn't really matter, we're in testing. Now you can see R1, that's burning 11.8 material per second. So yeah, you make sure you've got plenty of material resources. But you can see that as that's already building up, and we're already over 6,000 power and shaft power. So it's producing both types of energy at the same time, and we're at 10,000. And this is just a simple 1 piston, 1 boiler. 11,000. Yeah, it's going up. So significant power. It'll be interesting to see where we end up. 11.8. We're already over 1,000 per resource point. If we're looking at power per resource point. I know it doesn't work out quite the same as fuel power per fuel point, but let's see where we're going to end up. So our piston is now about up to speed, and this is with minimal or no load on the system. So showing 23,000 power. Now, although it is showing it as electrical and mechanical, one thing to be aware of, you can produce either, but if you try and produce both, then it reduces down, and the end result is you're only going to produce one type of power. So our power bar in the bottom right hand corner is showing 23,000, which is the amount from this particular piston. But if we induce a load, so I'm going to put a load in here using the shield, and so that's putting 12,000. You can, I don't know if you hear the piston actually reduce significantly. So because it's putting torque onto the engine, we can see that our actual power has gone down to 11,900 or so, which is we're losing electrical energy. So it's not producing 20-odd thousand double. It's not producing both energy, electrical and mechanical. It's only producing one. So it's not fair to say you can add those figures together to get a figure of how much power it's creating. We can see down in the bottom right it's showing as 12,400. So it does depend on the setting of electrical engine. I've got my electrical engine set at 100%. And set to produce about 11,000 power. So it is producing, only got 600 spare, which is just about enough to charge up the battery or keep the battery running. If I just increase it a little bit, we'll take it a little bit above. So now we're in a negative figure. We can see our power available is showing 0 on the bottom right, and the battery is going down. So we're not producing 22,000, we are only producing the 12,000. If anyone's asking about the actual electrical engine. If I can just get it, bear with me. So electric engine is at 100% producing 14,000. But it is producing, it is using electricity, so the engine can't produce electricity and power at the same time. Okay, end result. Usable power is about 11,700. turn this off now for a second, for 11.8 materials. Set this down to 0. So end result is we are producing about just under 1000 power per resource point for this engine. Now we can compare that to the other engines as well, just to see what efficiency is like. I haven't put a turbine on this yet, but I'm sure a turbine would actually produce a good amount of power for the amount of resources we put on there. But the other part we want to look at is the new section, which is steam propellers. So there is a couple of extra parts that have also been added in now. If we go to the menu, steam engines, we use the huge gearbox. So first of all, you've got a huge gearbox, then you have to have an engine shaft. Then there's a few items we can have after that. One is the axis shifting gears and the reduction gear. Now the axis shifting gear, as the name suggests, shifts the axis by one block, and this block you can have it in multiple ways. You can have it so it goes shifts the block up, to the left, to the right, or down. And the requirements for it is, first of all, it has to be connected directly to an engine shaft. So you have to have an engine shaft from the crank. You can't put it direct from the crank. I noticed it has to be specifically an engine shaft. Then out of it has to come an engine shaft, and then it turns it. There's no reduction. It just moves the shaft point up and down. Depending on your ship, you might want your propellers or your engine shafts down below. Next is the gearbox. So this is the huge gearbox. As you can see, it's, well, huge. And basically, what it does is it increases the overall turn rate of the propeller coming out the end. So you have to have a propeller shaft coming out the end. You have to have an engine shaft on the front of it and a propeller on the rear. And we can see down at the bottom we don't have a propeller shaft, so I'll show you a fully built system. So on the end of this you could put a propeller shaft, and we could have, in this particular case, up to a 7-meter propeller, which is pretty damn massive. I don't think it'll allow me to put that there because the blocks underneath. No, I don't think so. But yeah, that's a fairly massive propeller on the back. Now, each of the other areas also, each of the other boiler sizes also has their own set of propellers and reduction gears, and here we have some example setups of the various sizes with the axle shifting and the gearboxes, etc. Now what we'll do is first of all go through, look at the small ones. So here we have some small boilers, and I've done 2 examples here going to out back, one with a single steam piston and one with 2 steam pistons. They then go into a shaft which goes into the axle shifting gears. You can see it's a little bit, it still only moves the area by 1 meter in any direction. So you just, and you can put multiple of these together to produce a single unit. It then goes out of there into an engine shaft and then into a reduction gear. Now here I have put 3 reduction gears in a row, all intended to increase the resultant propeller speed, because the faster the propeller goes, the more power you get from it. So I will turn up the power on here, so we're up to our 0.6 materials per second, and the engine is starting up. So we have our small boiler is now up to speed and stable, and it's up to its maximum power of 1200 61 power, although that's not actually what we'll get under load, which we'll just have a look at in a second. And it's rotating that engine shaft down the bottom at, let's see, 28 RPM. So if we just, as a comparison, I'm just going to put this, increase this load just to show what it gets under power. So if we put full power to that shield, this should now go down to 635 power. So just as an idea, so that's 635 power for 0.6 material. So it's about 1000 power per resource point, approximately. I'll turn this power off. We don't need this shield anymore. It's just to show. So the actual single piston efficiency of the huge and the small is actually the same. In that regard, it's 4 to 1. Yeah, it's producing the same, but that is actually producing significantly more. But it does take up significantly more space. It is producing about 20 times the power, so producing I think it was about 600, and that was producing nearly 1200, so it's at 20 times. Yeah, so it's taken up, it is producing 20 times the power for the space. Okay, now back to the steam propellers. So we've got our piston moving at 28. Now we're going to give it some power. So we've got a whole load of gearboxes, which you can see are turning, and it comes out into a 1 meter propeller. So the options for the small steam engines is go gearbox small. You've only got 1 meter propeller, and the reduction gears are smaller as well, which is handy. So end result here is the reduction gears increase the propeller rotation. Now if we look on the window that is displayed on the right hand side, you'll notice down near the bottom the propeller needs to get to its maximum speed of 180. You need to at least rotate the shaft at 40. So that would mean that on the 180, you can work back what is the actual rate we've got on these gearboxes. So if I take out one of the gearboxes as an example, I can replace it with just propeller shafts, and give it a second to sort itself out. So you can see now that the number to get to maximum is now 60. So we've reduced that rate that particular gearbox is working at. So now it's running at a 3 to 1. To get to 180, we've got to run at 60. So that's a 3 to 1 ratio. If we just take it down to the single gearbox, there we go. So sink back down to a single gearbox. You can see it's 120 to get to 180, so it's about 1.5. So each gearbox gives you about a 1.5 advantage, and then that's multiplied for each gearbox it goes through. So it's 1.5 each time. So I think that's about correct. I'll work out the maths later. Anyway, the more gearboxes you have, the faster the propeller runs at the end, but they take up space. So let's just see, give it some power, and we'll see what it actually produces. So I'm going to just force our ship forward here. So what we can see is down at the bottom of the window on the right is we've got force applied is 4,600, and that one propeller is moving the ship at a reasonable 9 meters a second. It's not a brilliant speed, but it is moving it. So we're running at 105 RPM on the propeller, and only 23 on the engine. So you've got room. You could put some more boilers in and increase the speed. Now, this is still also producing mechanical power. So this is still producing 1100 power to be used on other things. So if we take this shield, we're going to turn the shield on. There we go. So now it's down to its 600 power being used, and we're still producing engine RPM, but it has gone down significantly because this piston is being used for other things now. So yeah, again, trying to do multiple at the same time is not the work. So you can't say, oh, okay, it's actually going to produce 600 power. If we just take it down to say 400, let's give 400 power. See if that produces 400 power. So here we've got, yeah, that's stabilizing up again, and our propeller is starting to go up. So base is that if you're producing a steam propeller design, you've got to allow for the fact that the power from this piston is not only going to be used for a propeller. You can't say only produce power for the propeller and don't decrease as the rest of the ship wants to use power. You have to allow for the fact that this will, under battle conditions, if shields or other things are using the power, you're going to change your speed overall. If we turn it down to none again. So multiple pistons, how do they work on this system? So allowing for, we've got this 4600 for a single piston. If I bring it into play the other dual piston system, so the boiler is up to pressure now, and with the dual piston system we are getting a nice power of 1277, which was a little bit higher. And if we put that actually under load, and I've given it quite a bit of load there, that goes down to, where's it going to go down to? Actually comes out about 760 or so. So it actually does produce, for the same amount of steam, it produces more power. So, which could be important, because effectively it's producing more torque, I suppose is the way to put it. So it's more efficient for the amount of resources burned. If we now go to the purely propeller side, so I'm going to turn off the shield. So it's got the same number of gearboxes. Let's go up and give it some speed. So I've requested maximum speed. So we've got the same rotation, 40, required for maximum speed, and we're slightly 4,200 rather than 4,600. So basically it's not getting quite as high a rotation speed because of the extra pistons. We'll put it under load though. So now this is under load for 2 areas from the shield as well. And I'll give it the same load as the other one had, which was 400. So let's just give it the same working load. There we go, it's only fair. So in this particular case, it hasn't gone as low. So this is where, for maximum speed, you want one single piston and lots of gearboxes basically. For if you want to use other components and have to run it under a load condition, you want multiple pistons, which will not give you as much top end but will not go down quite as much when under load. that's what it looks like to me. If we can just compare that again to the other side, I'll have them both running at the same time. Well, I'm going to have to go back on one element that I just made, in that, yes, the twin piston is producing slightly more power, 658 and 648, but actually at the propeller, we're getting a force of about 2,520 and 2,290. So the single piston is beating the dual piston. Potentially, I don't know, if you went up to something like 8 pistons, would it be effective? I think the speed of the propeller would be so low at that point that it would not be effective. But okay, interesting. I was expecting it to go the other way around, so looking at that, not too much reason, especially I'm not going to crash into anything. That was a little lucky. It looks like there isn't that. Better to have lots of single pistons than trying to put everything into a multiple pistons. I would have expected and preferred there was an advantage in some way of having multiple pistons in the design. We're now, I think, fairly back up to a full speed type situation, and we've got 4,600 still going up, 4,640, 4,200 on the power. So yeah, the single piston is working quite nicely there. So now we have the large boiler. So I've got a nice little, again, 4 boilers for the large running at 100%, and it's using 5.7 material, and that is producing from a single large piston is, well, 11,000 power, but when we put it under load, it produces actually around about 5,700, 6,000 real usable power. So that again equates to about 1,000 power per resource point, which is similar to what we had before. One thing I would say on this, with its size, it is getting up to a much higher RPM, although you have to allow the boiler size here is 9 times larger. So we're getting up to quite a high RPM now. It's interesting to see on the propeller, because theoretically we could overpower this. Let's give it a bit of power and see how we go. We're getting a bit of cavitation, but that's fine. I'm going to give it up to maximum power, see what we get. Engine RPM has gone down to 121. Now the gearboxes on this, we have 2 gearboxes, and they're giving us a slightly less than 1.51 ratio, because we need 70 to get up to maximum speed on the propeller, which we are running at maximum speed. So that would mean we could theoretically reduce the power going to this propeller, to the piston, and we could balance it to maximum speed here. But we're going at a fair old clip. It's producing 30,000. Now this is using a let's see, which propeller do they use? I think this is using the 3 meter propeller, because the 5 meter propeller was cavitating. Yes, we put the 5 meter propeller, we'll put the 5 meter on there to see how it. Now you'll see down the bottom it says cavitating, because basically the top of the blade is out of the water in this particular one, so it's not producing as much water. It is going faster. It is producing nearly 70,000 power. It's really forcing it forward, as you could imagine, going at maximum speed, even with a massive reduction for the cavitation. We'll put the 3 meter back on just for the moment. And obviously if you put more gearboxes on here for the let's see, 70 to, what's the maximum speed? So, oh, actually, it is because this propeller can actually go up to 210, whereas the other propellers were limited to 180. So that's why we've got a different ratio of the gearbox, because the propeller for some reason can go faster. I think it's partially because of the larger shafts. It can actually go faster, although I'd actually expect that to be the other way around again. A smaller means less rotational torsion on the shaft, so you would actually expect that a smaller propeller being tighter to the centre could go faster with less torsional effect on the propeller than a large propeller. But hey ho, that's the designers. So that's it being used and producing all of the power, and yeah, that's going quite nicely. So I had said about using as many gearboxes as possible. So the obvious question is, what if you put lots of them? So down below we have a single piston, which was the best for having full boilers, and 14 gearboxes here. So we now have a ratio. We only have to get up to 8.57 rotations, which we're already at, to get maximum rotational speed of the propeller. So that was 14 gearboxes. So if we just get the speed up, I think we've got a little bit of power still coming from the large propeller here, but we'll just let that come out in a second. So we are almost up to maximum power, 174 out of 180. And you can see the piston's hardly moving and running at 0.6, and we're getting up to 13. We've got, let's see, the force coming out the back is 7,000. So yep, it's definitely more. It's nearly double what we were getting on the single. I think singles were about 4,400 or so, so not quite double, but that's a lot of gearboxes, and those gearboxes cost resources. But theoretically, if you wanted to do the maximum with the minimum amount of resources, that seems to be working quite nicely. You need as many gearboxes as you can. If I put more gearboxes in, then I could reduce the amount of power going into the boiler. But that just happened to be what got it up to maximum speed for my testing. So just interesting, 14 gearboxes. While we're here, the other addition that was in this patch was large rudders. As you can see here is a large rudder. Let me just bring this out of the water and slow it down. So this is under the water. You've got large rudders, and you've got various sections you can use to build a rudder component. You can see that these are all of various shapes and sizes to be able to shape it however you like. So lots of options from curved sections to flat, angled, 2B1 sections. So you can build a rudder however you like, and each of these components has a rudder force they will apply. Now, to use the rudder function, you need to put it onto a spin block, and then control. I found that you had to control the spin block using command blocks to set the rudder direction based upon the yaw command. Now, I tried without those ACBs, it basically would not turn using the AI. So now that I have got those in turn, by pressing, I'm using the I and Y keys, and you can see that the rudder is turning to my requests. or basically holding the button down that makes it turn towards, I have them set to 45 degrees, and it's making the rudder turn to 45 degrees. And also, if we now turn the
returning to formation
AI on, you can see that the AI is now turning it. So I've got, first of all, I have a spin block, so if there is no yaw command, go back to center. And then if there is a yaw command, go left or right 45 degrees, depending on which yaw command was being given. If we let this come down, we should see this go into the water, and there we go. We have this going forward, and it's going to be trying to follow its path, so it's going to be it's turning around, which is fine. And you can see there it's changing the rudder once it starts getting online. Now you will find it will wobble. This is normal even with the normal one because it oversteers. It's not possible to have it steer on a more consistent angle, but that happens with the normal rudder as well. You can reduce it by reducing the amount of angle you give the rudder. So here we're going back to the opposite way. And it's turning the other way. That's all the AI doing this. So it's basically oversteering every time. If I bring up the view for showing path view on my menu at the bottom, you can see where it's trying to go. As the AI keeps on changing, it keeps on changing the angle, and it oversteers fairly often. There isn't. I thought of using a PID, except there isn't seems to be a PID for yaw control. There's only PIDs for pitch and roll, not for yaw. So you can't have it be more smooth, for want of a better word. The most you could do is reduce the amount of turning force this has by reducing the angle. It would still do the same. Looks much better. Functionally, it functions. It's more aesthetic. You could just use a standard rudder. You'll have the similar sort of turning issues, for want of a better word, a bit smooth, but this looks like a much nicer rudder, so fairly much for aesthetics. Okay, for the next section, I'm just going to bring in another ship, a couple of ships. So for testing purposes and comparison, I've loaded in the Dreadnought, which currently uses we'll call them electric propellers, and it has 23 propellers on the back, which propel it around 14 to 15 meters a second, using about 1725 power. Now, using a fuel engine, and it's got an engine, it's not hyper efficient, it's more done for power, of around 297 power per fuel. So that's using currently about 0.58 resources per second. If you use a fuel block, which is 1,000 fuel for 100 material. If you used even a basic refinery, that would go down to 0.127 resources per second. So basically less than a quarter of that value. If I go over to my other ship, so this is an alternative version of the Dreadnought using some propellers, and what we have in here is 3 large pistons, each going to 3 gearboxes, and then 5 meter propellers on the back. So they are going to apply a force of about 5,000. Now they're taking time to spool up compared to the electric ones, which were instantly available. So there is you have to allow for a spool time. And as far as area, all of these gearboxes, etc., is not very dense, i.e. compared to just putting a block on the rear of the ship. So this whole section is extra. Plus, we've got the boilers, which are down here somewhere. I put them back. We have basically 8 boilers, which are each producing 0.7 material. So that's a total of approximately 5.6 resources per second. And well, we're not up to speed yet. We're still accelerating. My fault there. Boilers were set at 25% cruising power. They're now up to their 50% full power. They're still building up steam, so it takes a while for the steam to build up in these boilers. But it's getting up to roughly the same speed. Now, as I said, these are going to use at the 50% approximately 5.6 resources per second to give the same speed as the other ship, which was only using 0.58. So that's 0.6 of a resource point per second. So end result of all of this little testing and review of these steam propellers is, I think they're great. And if they put the same type of system needing shafts and gearboxes, etc., into the petrol engines, then there can be some advantages. But I will never use these in a campaign. That resource level is horrendous. Even if these are producing power that could be used elsewhere at the same time, 5.6 resource points a second as opposed to less than 0.6 of a resource point a second for the same speed. And there's no density now with the gearboxes and all the other shafts you've got to have in here. There is no density advantage. The boilers themselves are a little smaller. If we compare the 2 engines I've got here, so this was the engine I've got. It's nothing really special at all. The gearboxes, yeah, the boilers are taking up maybe a quarter of the space, so that's fine. But once you add up all of those gearboxes, pistons, tubing, etc., it's taking up the same amount of space. So there's no actual density for the same end result. Things I think need to be done, I think, on this: some advantage between small, large and huge boilers. At the moment, they all produce the same amount of steam effectively for the same resource input, 1,000 points per resource point. There needs to be some advantage for using huge, small, large, etc. I can't see any. The spool up times mean that you're just going to spam small boilers just to get the high spool up time and never use the huge or large. To be honest, there's no real need to. If there was a resource advantage or some other advantage for using the different size boilers, that would be good. Alternatively, the pistons need to have an advantage in some way, in that the larger pistons are more efficient at some point under high pressures or etc. Basically give some reason to be able to start managing the steam system to work out what is the most effective. Now, I would expect small pistons, small boilers, fast ramp up speeds, but don't produce as much power per resource point as, say, the small or huge. Huge take a long time to ramp up, but should be more efficient. Basically, it's an efficiency of scale. That's what I'd like to see. Of course, ultimately, resource-wise, in campaign mode, and we're not talking tournaments. In tournaments, I think if you're only to be lasting, say, a couple of minutes, then Steam, you only to use a couple of hundred resources. In which case, yeah, go for it. The amount of power you get is good. But in a campaign where I've got to have this travelling across the map and it's going to be going into multiple fights, you know, some of the fights can last quite a long time. You know, I've had half an hour to an hour fights at times with ships. I'm going to use more than the ship in resource points, just, you know, purely to power these steam engines. So what could be done about that for campaign mode is use, I don't know, in real life what they started doing is fuel sprayers. They sprayed oil onto the boilers or into the boilers to increase the coal burning rate. So and then eventually they had oil fired boilers. Make the resource points higher than petrol or something, but yeah, basically campaign won't use these steam engines. It's a pity because I think they look excellent, but they would kill the campaign, frankly, unless I make resources free. Basically, I don't see a point in using them. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant there. Shouldn't have ended on that, but it is my view of this. I think it's a great update, and what could make me use these, although I'd have to work it in and it's going to be bloody difficult, is if propellers using from a petrol engine had to use the same system, i.e. at the end of the crankshaft you put your engine shafts and the various gearbox, etc. from the petrol engine, and the petrol engine had an RPM associated with it, and a torque factor, so that, you know, depending on the size of the propeller you put on the end of it, it would affect the torque and power of the engine. Then there may be advantages of using supercharged over turbocharged engines, in that a supercharger would produce more torque for a propeller as opposed to a turbocharger which only produced high-end power, good high RPM, but would, you know, unless you made a humongous engine, would slow down too much to power the propeller. So there's lots of things I'm sure they can work out to make it interesting, shall we say, and then maybe make a reason to use the steam engines. Anyway, that's it for now. Rant over. Hopefully they'll do some work on this and some balancing and look at refining it. I know there has been talk about an overall power change of looking at, you know, petrol engines a little bit, but there is a, you know, you can't touch the mini game of maximizing the fuel engines. Don't touch those. But I think there needs to be some sort of balancing or some sort of work on this to make it interesting and a reason to use it. Let's put it that way. Anyway, that's it for now. As always, leave any comments. I'm sure there's a few bits I missed. There were some other bits I wanted to look at, but I started getting too deep into steam engines. I'll look at them at another time or in another video. Until next time, keep playing the game, and always, as always, have fun.